Greetings everyone, my name is Sollidnitrogen, and welcome to something a little bit different. I've had this little pet theory of mine, well, more of a preemptive bit of analysis, for a while now, but I haven't really had the courage to make a proper, full-blown video out of it. But I realized that with Deltarune Chapter 3 and 4 right around the corner, this is sort of my last chance to get this idea out there, before it becomes entirely disproven or entirely obvious. For a time, I found it a bit strange that Chapter 2 brings back the Thrash Machine. Why go through all the effort of setting up something and destroying it, all to prove the point that your choices don't matter, only to bring it back exactly as the player designed it one chapter later, even serving you a direct difference in gameplay for that chapter's final boss. It wasn't for fan service. I can scarcely think of anyone who even thought about Thrash after beating Chapter 1, and by all means it seemed to go against the very point Deltarune had previously been trying to make. So why? Then, a few short weeks after Chapter 2's release, data miners had fully uncovered a hidden genocide-esque route, which culminates in the straight-up death of a main cast member. If Thrash Machine was going against the point of Chapter 1, then this was actively spitting in the face of it. But to what end? Well, sometime later, I began to see people coming to the conclusion that Chapter 2 was setting up something of a tug-of-war between freedom and control, that each chapter would veer in one direction or the other to different extents, in a continuous argument. But I wouldn't hear about this until I came to my own, separate conclusion. You see, thinking over the chapter's contents, I began to notice a pattern. Through puppets on strings, possessive wires, and the parallels between an overbearing mother and controlling motherboard, all centered around a character struggling with learned helplessness, who can be psychologically manipulated in the aforementioned secret route, I realized that Deltarune simply changed the angle at which it examines a lack of free will. And from there, I came to the suspicion which I aim to implant upon you in this very video. Each of Deltarune's chapters has been, and will be, tackling unique interpretations of the dynamic between freedom and control, these themes being conveyed through the chapter's setting, its primary antagonist, its lightener of interest, secret boss, and hidden weird route. I'll also be going over how I think this may apply to future chapters at the end. Now, with all that preamble out of the way, let us begin.
Freedom of choice and predetermined fate.
I feel the need to preface this section by making it clear that I don't think Chapter 1's theming is necessarily that cohesive. Not because I don't think it's well written, but because, as the beginning of the game, it seeks to introduce us to multiple important ideas. And so the theme we're looking for shares a lot of space in the narrative with the much more broad, overarching theme of the relationship between constructed reality and its constructor, as told here through the Darkner's abandonment. I'll be pointing these out as we find them, but I won't be going into detail on them tonight. I believe the best place to start would be the admittedly quite stretched themes of the setting, and work our way up from there to the more convincing points. Chapter 1, of course, has the various discussions of Darkner's purpose, and the whole setup for the chapter revolves around a prophecy, a literal symbol of predetermined destiny. But primarily, its setting is a kingdom of toys and game pieces, abandoned by its gods. This, of course, ties into the Darkner's abandonment theme, but the idea of the set path nature of most board games, and the way kids will act out narratives and stories with their toys, sticks out in my head as associating very heavily with the lack of free choice. This is a stretch, I know, but we also have an angle more closely aligned with what we're looking for if we focus solely on the kingdom's authority, the cards. Cards are a symbol of two things: either gambling, in which a player's outcome is left entirely up to random chance, or cardomancy, the practice of using cards to divinate knowledge of the predestined future. These together literally represent a dichotomy between the inherent lack of meaning in your choices and the efforts to wrestle that meaning back. Now, typically, cartomancy is done using the tarot deck, but there are equivalent readings for the French deck. Notably, the black and red jokers are equivalent to the Fool and Magician, respectively, which leads me to believe this interpretation was intentional, as Sham, the closest friend of Jevel, being the former court magician, seems to be a reference to this. That being said, all of this is still an extremely thin stretch. It fits better in my head than I can possibly put it into words, so instead of linger on this further and make myself look like even more of a fool, I figure it would be best to move on to something more substantial, starting with the main antagonist.
But Alex, what does King have to do with predetermined fate?
Well, to that I say, you fool! You buffoon! You absolutely reasonable person! King may be the villain and final boss of Chapter 1, but he's not necessarily the antagonist. He ties much more into the Darkner's abandonment theme, and the actual main antagonist, the one we see most often and who is more directly tied to the arcs of the characters, is Lancer. And Lancer's relationship to choice is actually quite interesting. Towards the climax of the chapter, just before they reach Card Castle, Lancer and Susie have a conversation. Lancer is apprehensive, afraid that his friends will be hurt, and Susie's promise to crush anything in her way doesn't help. Because though she doesn't know it, the person Lancer is afraid of hurting them is his own dad. It's here that Lancer is faced with an ultimatum. King Spade is stubborn, and won't back down no matter what. Lancer has to decide to either let his friends kill his dad, or let his dad kill his friends. But Lancer instead chooses not to choose. By locking his friends up, they'll never have to fight King, and so none of the people he loves have to die. This, of course, leads to the fight with Susie. Susie, in having to fight someone she really cares about, who won't back down no matter what, realizes that Lancer is prepared to die, and if she doesn't back down, she will kill him. And despite her rage at his betrayal, she can't bring herself to do it, because ultimately Lancer is the only person who's respected and looked up to her, and she does care about him a lot. Once the two actually have a conversation, and Susie really listens, she actually understands. She resolves the conflict by making the decision to... Actually, let me pause right there. In order to convey the importance of this scene, we need to go back and discuss the themes present in this chapter's lightener of interest, Susie. It's not hard to see how Susie ties in with freedom of choice. She doesn't let others have it and takes it for herself. She denies you the first dialogue prompt in the school hallway. She rejects the legend, I reiterate, a literal symbol of predestiny. She ignores any battle commands while in your party, flips the script entirely again by becoming a villain, and even as a villain, she continues to remove your freedom of choice with the thrash machine. Once she's out of earshot in the prison, she literally can't even hear your directions. Time and time again, she takes away choice, intentionally or otherwise, often to the end of choosing things for herself. She even chooses how others think about her before they can ever actually explain themselves. She decides she already knows how Chris feels about her, and of course, she decides she already knows what was going on with Lancer. But Susie, in having to fight someone she really cares about, who won't back down no matter what, realizes that Lancer is prepared to die, and if she doesn't back down, she will kill him. and it's never actually been about killing him, despite the threats, because she does truly care about him. She wants to push him away, to throw him to the side and get him to run, to be afraid of her, because she wants to not be hurt by it. But Lancer is stubborn, and when she's pushed to the edge, she just can't bring herself to do it. Once the two actually have a conversation, and Susie really listens, she actually understands Lancer's dilemma. Of course she does. It's what she just went through. And after a whole adventure of taking choices from others, I think it's important that she resolves this conflict by making the decision to relinquish her own freedom of choice to make her friend happy. She promises to find a way to win without fighting, and tells Chris that she's willing to listen to battle commands now in order to reach this goal. Even after Chapter 1 concludes, Susie continues to disrupt choices, but now for selfless reasons, shaking up the entire battle system to let other party members act on their own, breaking away with Ralsei and leaving Chris on their own so that she can spend time with Ralsei to learn and later surprise Chris with her ultimate healing move. Keep a pin in this. I can't make any sound observations since we only have 2 chapters to go off of, but I'll come back to this in my prediction section at the end. That was a lot. We still have just a little bit to get through, but hopefully it shouldn't be too complicated. Oh no! To analyze the thematic relevance of Jevil, we have to understand him in the first place. And this is, as you'd expect, easier said than done for a guy that only speaks in poorly translated riddles. So bear with me for a bit while I do some groundwork. I saw a lot of people write off Jevil's notion that he's the only truly free one as him just being crazy very early on. But insanity doesn't necessarily mean someone is just wrong or foolish. It means they have an entirely different conceptualization of the world, a different definition for things. And lines about Jevil's freedom being from his perspective corroborate this. Jevil is physically trapped, and he even acknowledges this, describing his freedom as little and lonely. So his freedom can't be a physical one. So what does he have that no other Darkner does? Well, knowledge. Jevil looked through a shadow crystal, and from the messages we can glean after using them in a dark world in both Chapter 1 and 2, we can infer that they allow those in the dark to see the light world. So, Jevil saw the world as a game because he looked through the crystal and saw the world was made out of game pieces and toys. And from there, he came to the conclusion that this knowledge made him free somehow, and that even when locked up, he's still free and everyone else becomes trapped, because his freedom comes from his knowledge, and therefore follows him wherever he goes. But even more peculiarly, Jevil seems to have knowledge of the future as well. He calls out the Queen and Hell's Roar if you beat him with violence, things that he wouldn't know about unless he'd seen the events of Chapter 2 before it even happens. And Sham, who we know Jevil said things to that affected them in some way, somehow knows the next secret boss after Spampton will be much stronger, and how to counteract that strength. This also adds some extra context to that comment I made earlier about the Magician and Fool being equivalent to the Red and Black Joker. If these two are legitimately tied to knowledge of the future, then using them as a springboard to reference fortune-telling and connect the typical tarot iconography with the French deck that comprises Chapter 1's enemies doesn't seem like much of a stretch at all. What's more is that Jevil's vision of the future is spoken as a warning, and Sham emphasizes the futility of our own actions. Whatever Jevil saw, it wasn't good, and I believe from here we can infer that Jevil saw Deltarune's ending, and how nothing can be done to change it. From here, he reached the perspective that choices with no meaning also have no consequence, that he can play the numbers game with anyone he wants. And none of it will matter, because if nothing matters, then
I can do anything!
not applicable. But in all honesty, the fact that there isn't a weird route does sort of prove the point, doesn't it? We think of it as the norm now, but when Deltarune first came out and you didn't know anything about it, you most likely, like me, thought there'd be some sort of sinister hidden genocide route, especially with that one comment from Ralsei at the start. But there isn't, because, well, your choices don't matter.
Freedom of action and control from others.
No use beating around the bush. Chapter 2 uses its theme in a much more cohesive way, and that also means it's a lot meatier. Plus, it's 20 days until Deltarune Chapter 3 comes out as of writing this section, and less than 2 weeks as of voicing it. And I don't really have time to waste. Chapter 2's setting is a huge urban city made out of computer tech, where the citizens are plugged in with giant wires that control their bodies against their will. The imagery is like it was taken directly out of a boomer humor, phone bad, book good comic, drawing our minds immediately to the way technology manipulates us, and getting us to think about that central theme of manipulation through that trope. No stretching here, this setting fits its theme like a glove, and it only gets more clear the further we go. Unlike Lancer, whose thematic relevance is compacted into a single climactic scene, Queen is constantly reinforcing the themes of her chapter. If you could describe her in one word, that word would probably be controlling. She's the one sending out the aforementioned control wires, of course. But even otherwise, her entire shtick is trying to get the Lightners to join her side as peons. She captures Noelle in an effort to pressure her into joining. She uses subversive tactics to legally make the Delta Warriors her henchmen, and the entire middle third of the chapter has her trying to peer pressure Chris to join her in a truce. Her entire evil plan, explained in her final fight, is to make every Lightner happy by literally taking over the world and making everyone reliant on her. The most interesting aspects of this appear, however, when you focus on her specific connection with Chapter 2's Lightner of interest, Noelle. There's a much better video from years ago by Daryl Talks Games that focuses entirely on Noelle's learned helplessness. I'll be glossing over the idea here by comparison, but if you're interested in more detail, I'll leave the link in the description for further viewing. Learned helplessness is a quirk of pattern recognition, arising in those who experience repeated negative circumstances outside their control. Affected individuals will see all future problems as insurmountable, regardless of the actual severity or the victim's actual ability to get through these circumstances. In other words, they've learned to be helpless. This is, of course, highly relevant to Deltarune. It's quite literally an atrophying of the victim's free will, their sense of agency, a process in their head which tells you that your choices do not matter. And it's clear enough to see how this applies to Noelle. The behavior is there. She lacks any kind of backbone, unable to stand up to Birdley or raise her voice for the teacher, and Rudy describes her as freezing like a deer in headlights when she's afraid, literally the aforementioned inability to prevent negative circumstances as part of learned helplessness. She's not lacking in circumstances outside her control that might cause or reinforce this behavior either. A classmate who constantly talks over her, a sick father in the hospital, a missing sister, and then there's the matter of her mother. Queen is pretty clearly meant to be a parallel to Mayor Holiday, the leader of a city living in a big mansion with a particular fixation towards Noelle. And Noelle acts in a similar way around both, too. She would seemingly rather avoid her mother than draw her attention, and likewise, Noelle spends the majority of the chapter avoiding Queen, hiding from her, disguising herself from her, never directly confronting her. But, as the chapter goes on, that wall of fear around her begins to wear down. The most effective way to fight learned helplessness is through outside help. Not necessarily to save the victim from their problems for them, but to guide them through solving an issue, as to let them understand that problems are indeed solvable, that they do have a will to affect things around them. And this is exactly what happens to Noelle through the course of Chapter 2, starting with the final mouse room, where Chris helps Noelle overcome her fear of mice through a form of exposure therapy, then the ride in Queen's car, where Queen reveals the reason for her obsession with Noelle is actually her strength, which she later expands on in the Giga Queen fight to be strength of will. Then Noelle begins to open up about Des to Chris. Even after getting captured, she has a genuine moment with Susie, and after finally gives Birdley the throttling he deserves. And of course, she does get captured again, and is the first to suggest giving up when Queen brings her giant robot out. But when things get dire, when Susie, someone she cares a lot about, is in danger, that wall of fear shatters, and Noelle is finally able to stand up to Queen. Queen, having done all of this to make Noelle and all of the other Lightners happy, backs down once she understands that Noelle won't be happy being controlled. Noelle finally understands that she has a will, and from there, she can stand on her own 2 feet. You know who can't stand on his own 2 feet, though? Man, where do I even begin with Spamton? His backstory's been theorized to hell and back. You know his deal. He met the G-Man over the phone, got really successful, found an old robot, peeked into heaven, spiraled, got really unsuccessful, got evicted, spent 20 plus years pulling Wile E. Coyote type stunts to get back into the basement and failing. Then he meets Chris, enlists their help in his plan to access the Neo body, which fails when he realizes it too is a puppet. He spirals further, attempts to steal Chris' soul in an effort to reach heaven, which ironically would have left him being controlled by the player instead. Cut the strings, learn the value of friendship, blah blah blah, you know all this already. I don't need to tell you all of this because he's fucking Spamton. But I suppose for the sake of clarity, I'll go through how certain aspects of his story relate in an interesting way, just to be thorough. One interesting aspect of Spamton's motivations lies in a piece of dialogue in his initial battle, which is that he was never a businessman for the money, he was in it for the freedom. Make your own deals, call your own shots, be your own boss, that sort of thing. He gives up that freedom by listening to the man on the phone, but ends up becoming wildly successful from it. After looking into the Shadow Crystal, Spamton cuts ties with his benefactor, and I do think it was Spamton that cut these ties, since you can still see the phone ringing in his shop, which he doesn't pick up or even acknowledge despite his impoverished state. In this way, his need for agency becomes much stronger after viewing his own lack of it as a Darkner through the Shadow Crystal. The end of his fight also hints at Chris having their own identity outside of the player's influence with their reaction, even more than Chapter 2 had already been doing. For God's sake, he's literally a ventriloquist dummy that later turns into a marionette! Do you get it? He wants freedom of agency and to not be controlled. He wants to be a real boy. That's the whole thing. That's the whole deal. Do you get it? Although, there is one peculiar discrepancy that appears if you look at Spamton's need for freedom as his primary motivation. His motives become entirely flipped if you enter the weird... Oh boy. The weird route is something of a condensed cubic meter of rock-solid thematic relevance. Where do I even begin? I suppose, well, at the beginning. So, you remember how I mentioned Queen elaborating on Noelle's strength as strength of will, of determination? Well, if you look at it from the perspective of determination as the ability to choose, to determine the fate of the world around you, then Noelle becomes very interesting. She's uniquely pliable to pressure due to her lack of agency, but apparently capable of acting on a very strong will. This is what I believe Queen singled out in her as useful in her plan to open a Neo-Dark fountain. And it's also what you single out when you use her as a lever to twist the entire narrative of Chapter 2 upside down. The Weird Route has you wearing down Noelle's agency through constant badgering, pressuring her to kill, to become stronger, then bending her further and further until she uses that strength, over and over again, time after time. Each time she does, the world around her changes irreversibly, and each time the changes scale along with that growing strength. First, obtaining an item for free, then skipping hazards, then breaking entire puzzles, then, of course, killing off a main character. And from there, the entire story completely changes trajectory. You don't even tread the same path. And every fun moment that was supposed to build up Noelle's sense of agency, it's completely circumvented. No mouse room, no Birdly, no limo, no Des, no Giga Queen. All of that development that Noelle would have gone through doesn't happen. Instead is the development you put her through, forcing her to act out her will, pressuring her until she snaps, giving her a dream so terrifying that she never wants to lose a sense of agency again. There's also Chris. In the base chapters, the player's true relationship with Chris is hidden in the subtext. The way they speak your chosen dialogue, their interactions in cutscenes where in Chapter 1 they had done barely anything physically, the chapter endings, Spamton. But in the Weird Route, you stretch your role as Chris until the separation between player and player character can't be hidden anymore. Noelle notices the recent changes in Chris's behavior. She describes a voice unlike theirs, that voice that she hears even as Chris has been downed in the fight with Birdly. We directly respond to Noelle's parenthesized text, something that's meant to indicate a person's inner monologue. And we do it multiple times. And the icing on the cake is Rousey's attempt to start the interlude with Susie. Chris refuses to imagine what Susie is up to, as if to force you to stay with them and not hurt Noelle further. And considering the obvious discomfort with their situation, that choice means a great deal for Chris. And then, of course, there's Spamton. As I said earlier, and I don't think I've seen anyone else notice this, Spamton's motivations seem to be completely reversed in the Weird Route compared to his normal arc. Think about it. Spamton's entire backstory hinges on his abandonment of material gains for the sake of pursuing his own freedom. But in the Weird Route, he never once even brings it up. Rather, he seems far more occupied on power, on ruling Cyber City and getting revenge on the people who wronged him. And sure, he clearly resented his former friends in his shop dialogue, but the tone was more, they fucked me over, I don't need them, they just weighed me down, and less, I'll make them all pay. As if his presence by the Dark Fountain, or maybe the violence of the Weird Route itself, has corrupted him. And I believe this is effectively Spamton reaching an ideological equivalent to Jevil, abandoning his greater quest for true freedom in favor of taking solace in doing whatever he wants. Without a friend, without the compassion he gets in the normal route, his heart has become filled with nothing but that bitter hatred. He's become selfish, manipulative, and opportunistic, compensating for his own lack of control by taking advantage of another's strength and using it to turn the Dark World on its head. In other words, he's just like you. And I think that's why he's the final boss of Snowgrave. He's a direct mirror, the other half of the plan that destroyed Noelle's sense of agency. There is no moral reason for this battle. No greater good either you or Spamton are fighting for. Just two bastards fighting over who gets to call the shots. But, for all of Spamton's stolen power taken from a Leitner's broken dream, your stolen power taken from Noelle is stronger. Oh, that was a lot. I'll be honest, I was expecting this to be like maybe a 20-minute video at most, but now we're pushing 30 minutes. But hey, we did it. Oh wow, we did it. We did it. We did it. We did it. We solved Deltarune. Now, let's not be too hasty in our celebrations. Now that I've assuredly, irrefutably, undisputably convinced you that I think this is how it works, it's time to make good on my earlier promise, and go over how I think this could apply to future chapters down the road. First of all is the Lighteners of Interest. You remember how I asked you to put a pin on that idea of Susie continuing to fuck with choices in Chapter 2, just in a helpful way? Well, I had to save this for the predictions section, because we won't be seeing it until at least Chapter 3, if I'm correct. But I believe that each Lightener of Interest we see grow in each chapter will go into future chapters as something of a bastion of their chapter's freedom. Susie, after Chapter 1, fights for others' freedom of choice, as seen with introducing the party member action mechanic, and I believe that Noelle will fight for others and her own freedom of agency down the road as well. But hey, enough of that boring shit. I know why you're really here. You want my last-minute Chapter 3 predictions. So let's take a look at what I think the themes of future chapters will be, and how that could apply to their characters. Given its obvious TV theming and the use of a green room, it's undoubtable that Chapter 3's setting will be related to theater, film, and showbiz. Given that, and Chris being the creator of the Dark World, which I'm not afraid to say also makes them the most likely candidate for Chapter 3's Lightener of Interest, I am 100% confident in my bet that Chapter 3's theme will be freedom of expression and control over people's identity. Perhaps taking place in a studio that forces all of its actors to behave in specific ways and never deviate. Maybe Tenna will be putting on a mask and struggling not to show the identity underneath, almost like an inverse of Mettaton. Or maybe he's a narcissist who treats all the actors like cardboard cutouts. Would certainly explain why Spamton hates him so much if he's so controlling. And speaking of, this isn't related to the themes, but while I have you, I think a variant of the Addisons will come back as TV commercial adverts, and that will be how Spamton met Mike. Hell, I'm locking it in now. Mike will be a commercial Addison, wrapping right back around to the Big Shot Soda reference. Maybe the secret boss is an actor, trying to play their own new character and carve out a unique identity for themselves. Or hell, with this theme, it really could genuinely be Friend Inside Me, and the secret boss is spoken for by someone else, literally unable to express themselves. However, given Spamton's dialogue on elemental pairs, and the highlighting of Thunder Light, I've come to what I think is a rock-solid conclusion. I think the secret boss will be a forgotten third-party member of the weather crew. The sun. We have a moon and a cloud, but not a sun, and it fits with the other secret bosses as well. We have a French deck missing its Joker, a group of ads and their outcast spam email friend, and now we have the suspiciously missing sun in a weather-themed duo. it could also fit into Gaster's cavalcade of devil imagery. A light-themed sun wanting to be more than their initial purpose, falling as a result. It's a perfect Lucifer allegory to match Spamton's deal-making Mephistopheles and Jevel's literal devil in the box. Now, as for the weird route, I think it will have to do with the aforementioned carrying over of Chapter 2's themes through Noel, and I think that's what not applicable but means as well. We'll get some kind of scene at the end of Chapter 3, separate from the whole Dark World storyline, that shows how Noel carries that freedom of agency with her, and if you did the weird route, it will be entirely warped. Or, if we're going off the freedom of expression theme, then perhaps we'll finally get our hands on a pure crystal, and be able to make that twisted sword that provides whatever trance effect Noel was under with the Thorn Ring onto Chris, possibly entirely screwing up their ability to carry forward the themes of Chapter 3. Now, Chapter 4 is a lot harder to pin down. Up until recently, we had no concrete proof of what the setting was going to be, but with the idea of a church now pretty much solidified in that Gothic architecture and those stained glass windows, I think I'll make the educated guess that Chapter 4's theme will be freedom of religion/belief, and the control over that belief. I'm less confident in this than my prediction for Chapter 3, but I still think it's a sound assumption. Perhaps the villain will be a traditionalist, stamping down on any heresy, or maybe even a New Age prophet, rising in popularity and trying to crush any other belief in their way. As far as lighteners of interest go, I think Caddy is a pretty safe bet. She has dialogue sounds and a portrait, despite her current lack of importance in the story, and she was highlighted in the Spamton Silence event, if only briefly. Plus, she's into the occult, which would fit the theme perfectly. For a secret boss, I'm well and truly stumped. But if we're going with a religious theme, I find myself pulled towards something well and truly devilish to represent the element of darkness, something so closely tied to Gaster. Then again, I could also see something very much tied to death, given that churches are where funerals take place. It's tough. I really don't know what to think. And disappointingly, same for the weird route. I'm not sure I could think of anything compelling. I've never really had writing for alternate creepypasta optional routes in my skill set. I hope that's not too underwhelming. Well, that's it for now, everyone. Sorry if the presentation or pacing of this video was a little bit scuffed. This is my first time really making one of these, and it certainly turned out to be a lot bigger than I anticipated. That being said, it was really fun to make, and if you like this, I would certainly not mind making more in the future. If you liked this video, leave a like. If you didn't, leave a dislike. If you want to see more of my videos, check out my channel. And if you like those too, consider subscribing. If this video interested you at all and you want to contribute to the conversation, or if you're 2 weeks into the future and want to make fun of how wrong I am, don't be afraid to leave a comment. Until next time, my name has been Sollidnitrogen, also known as AlexC, and I'll see you next time you see me. See ya! You see, thinking over the chapter's contents... Contents? Fuck you. Go to hell. Eat shit and die! In this way, his own need for agency becomes much stronger after viewing his own lack of it as a darkener through the shadow crystal. What the fuck was that? What was that? What the fuck was that reading? Why did I say it like that? What the fuck? Plus, she's into the occult, which would fit? Fuck you!
Oh, but Alex, what does king have to do with predetermined fate? Oh, Alex, what does king have to do with predetermined fate? Well, actually, Alex, what is the... fuck. Oh, Oh, but Alex, what does king have to do with predetermined fate? But Alex, what does king have to do with predetermined fate? Oh, but Alex, what does a king have to do with predetermined fate?
But Alex, what does king have to do with predetermined fate?
Oh, but Alex, what does king have to do with predetermined fate?
But Alex, what does king have to do with predetermined fate? But Alex, what does king have to do with predetermined fate? But Alex, what does king have to do with predetermined fate? I'm just fucking around now. I'm sorry. I can't help it. It's like I can't not be silly. All right, like you know I can't. It's I have to be silly. I forgot my line. I gotta check again. But Alex, what does king have to do with predetermined fate? But Alex, what does king have to do with predetermined fate? But Alex, what does king have to do with predetermined fate? Oh, but Alex, what does king have to do with predetermined fate?
Alex, what does king have to do with predetermined fate?
Oh god, I'm so sorry.
Now to switch into something a little bit more comfortable. Actually, it's very uncomfortable. I'm wearing a fucking bathrobe on top of my fucking sweater vest, on top of a long sleeve shirt, in the middle of fucking May.